On September 8, 1774, John Adams wrote about something he called the most sinful feast.
A most sinful feast again. 20 sorts of tarts, floating islands, whipped syllabubs, etc., etc.
He was speaking of a dinner that was held in Philadelphia at Samuel and Elizabeth Powell's home. In addition to this fantastic spread, I'm going to show you how to make a trifle, a vol au vent with berries, and a Shrewsbury cake. We're going back to the very same room at the Powell House to recreate the Sinful Feast and to bring you a taste of history.
Elizabeth Powell acquired the Powell House, which had been built a few years before, around the time they got married in 1769, and they moved in shortly thereafter. The house is one of the few surviving grand Georgian examples of Philadelphia architecture from the 18th century, and it gives us a wonderful example of what life was like in 1760s and 1770s Philadelphia.
I've been expecting you. Come in.
Looking back at the Powell House really gives us insight into how men and women used their homes to communicate something about their burgeoning American identity and ideology.
Let's face it, 18th century Philadelphia was a man's world, but women were not without influence. They just had to go about extracting their influence in creative ways.
One of the wonderful things about the Powell House is it allows us to tell the story of women's involvement in politics. They incorporated politics as part of their tea table, their dining table conversations, and they didn't limit their conversations just to the more traditional topics. A woman like Elizabeth Powell, she did not advocate that women have a seat at the political table, so to speak, but she did believe that a woman could influence the conversation. During the Constitutional Convention, most of the members, they would come and have meals at her house. And what was going on during the debates was then discussed at her dining room table.
The Powells were known for having some of the most lavish and influential parties here in Philadelphia. In fact, in 1774, the Powells hosted John Adams and other members of the Continental Congress for what they called a Sinful Feast.
1774, September 8th, Thursday. Dined at Mr. Powell's with many others. A most sinful feast again. Everything which could delight the eye or allure the taste. Curds and creams, jellies, sweet meats of various sorts, 20 sorts of tarts, fools, trifles, floating islands, whipped syllabubs, etc., etc. Parmesan cheese, punch, wine, porter, beer, etc., etc.
Well, Chef, you asked me to recreate the Sinful Feast from 1774, and here it is.
And you certainly have done an extraordinary job. It's beautiful.
Thank you very much. There's a little bit of everything. So
go ahead.
Start in the far corner with some French macarons. Perfect addition to every sweet table, crispy, soft. Next, we have our favorite, Diablotin, Little Devil. So it's just chocolate mixed with nuts and dried fruit. This one has candied orange peel and almonds.
I see you decorated Diablotins with rose petals, like Mrs. Powell would have done, because she was quite the hostess of the 18th century.
Another chocolate delight, ganache tartlets, just very simple chocolate and heavy cream in a sweet tart shell. Moving on to the excellent cake, Martha Washington's recipe, of course. The inside is that yeasted, beer-laden cake with the candied orange and the currants and the spices, and it just comes together so nicely with the orange buttercream and, of course, the candied orange slices on top. And there we have just a classic almond financier, brown butter, almond flour, not much else. Some black licorice and candied almonds, Philadelphia being the confectionery epicenter of the time, really.
Because so many French people came over here between 1790, 91, 92 and established on 2nd Street.
Right, so we have some whipped syllabub here. It's essentially just whipped cream. This one's topped with some more orange segments and fresh berries, another staple on every single sweet table you would have seen in the 18th century.
Just really great.
Wonderful, tall, beautiful, very nice centerpiece, trifle, blueberry and orange with the beautiful flower decoration.
Now this one here, in the 18th century, many recipes I find also use liqueur in there. You can put orange liqueur, Tambouille,
yes.
what we call like Coleman in there. Let me take a little bit of taste of that. Wow. I want to go back to the pastry shop to show you how this spectacular trifle is actually made with Diana. Creating the Sinful Feast of Eliza Powel wasn't an easy task. We're only down the street in our bake shop here in the City Tavern, and we're going to make the dish that is most likely adored any sweet table that I know of, which was any form of a trifle.
Oh yes. Get going with this orange here. So first thing you want to do is cut off either end on an angle, carefully slice down and around until the orange and the pith are exposed. Okay, so now all the skin is off. So we're just going to, over our bowl here, we're going to go in between each of the membrane there and very carefully just cut basically through to the center. You're just pulling out each segment from in between the membrane. And as you can see, it's already coming out. Voila!
What's unique with the orange, it also adds more moisture to it because a dry trifle is not really pleasant.
That's right. So I'm just going to squeeze the rest a little bit, get all that juice out. So the first layer is cake on the bottom. Keep everything together and just press that in. And if you will do the honors of the booze.
You got the right guy for the job here.
Perfect. Just dousing this with Grand
Marnier.
Marnier. We'll use a little bit of our pastry cream here. And, you know, there's no measurements here. This is not the science part of baking. This is just
the fun part.
The fun and beautiful part.
But again, having said it, you need to pre-prepare. It's not an easy recipe to come together.
Smooth it out. Doesn't have to be perfectly flat. Some blueberries.
How many you want in?
A healthy layer. Be a little messy building. That's okay. The top is where we'll really place them individually and make it look pretty. That looks great. So now we'll top with one layer of the Shrewsbury cakes. We can crumble them, kind of fill in the gaps in between the blueberries. Now, use a little bit of whipped cream, our syllabub here. It really is just whipped cream, but there's some sherry and some white wine and lemon juice. So again, gonna smooth that out. Perfect.
All right.
And now, if you'll assist me in getting some orange slices in there from the outside. Perfect ring of orange segments.
Which were very expensive those days.
Okay.
All right.
Now we repeat. How's it looking?
Looking good.
All right.
Looking good enough to eat.
That's great news. So now I've got some extra syllabub in a pastry bag here so that we can make
a nice top.
Pretty border and just make it look really nice. Makes a nice little syllabub crown.
Mm-hmm. Oranges in the middle.
Good pile of them, and all that juice will continue to soak down into into that cake layer. Oh yes, look at that.
Beautiful. I gotta do this guy here.
Oh yes, so beautiful.
You got them from your greenhouse, I assume?
Absolutely, just out back. The color on these is amazing. Okay, maybe a dot of blueberry on top in between. Okay, what do you think?
I think it's spectacular. And you know that I'm sure that there was not a sweet table of people of means ever without a beautiful trifle and a croquant bush being displayed. There's one thing missing. I got to taste it. Wow. It's all in harmony.
Good.
It's really beautiful. I've never met anybody that doesn't like a beautiful trifle.
How could you not? Look how beautiful.
You can change any berries you want, but the beautiful recipe, you gotta make it. One of the many favorite drinks the 18th century has to offer was the syllabub. Syllabub basically is whipped cream and sugar that you make to a soft peak, like you have right here. Next, you add into it sherry, mix it right under it, brandy, cognac, if you had the means, white wine, like a sweeter side of white wine, like a Riesling, would be perfect for that. Then you need to add some acidity into it, which is lemon juice and lemon zest. Mix it all up. Let me take a taste of it quick if it needs anything. Oh, it is beautiful. It's perfect. A couple of raspberries, a couple of blackberries, whatever you have. Try that for me.
Okay. Don't have to ask me twice.
I know.
Delicious.
The syllabub would go great with a trifle. Love the 18th century.
Walter, this is Samuel Powell's front parlor where he conducted all of his business affairs.
I can imagine there was a lot of people coming through here, right?
Indeed, with owning over 90 properties and also being a merchant and Philadelphia's mayor, everybody came to this room. So even though Samuel Powell gets all the credit for running the family business, Elizabeth was involved with his business affairs. And upon his death, Elizabeth Powell took over the entire business. Late 18th century women weren't typically known for having influence on men. However, Elizabeth Powell was certainly one of the ones that would.
Elizabeth created what we consider a salon culture. It was an opportunity for men and women, well-educated, wealthy, to come together and to have polite conversation where you can demonstrate your knowledge and your expertise.
And Walter, you've been in this room before, the Powell dining parlor. This was one of the first dining parlors in all of Philadelphia.
It's a spectacular woman. I'm obviously completely intrigued with her selection of china that came over from Europe.
Our house was open to the president and his friends in making them at ease and comfortable. They would confide in me, and as a consequence, I felt that I had perhaps a greater influence.
Some of the ways we know about Elizabeth Powell's influence in federal politics is in her correspondence. And among her most beloved and perhaps famous letters is one that she wrote around 1792 to George Washington. We don't know how he communicated this, but he definitely lets her know that he is thinking about not running for a second term for the presidency. And she says, "It's been a few days since you told me this information, and I have to share my thoughts with you. You must run for a second term." And she is pretty much telling him, you are our bedrock. If you step down now, it's going to crumble. So, it's very possible that Elizabeth was quite persuasive and influential in his thinking to run for a second term. Elizabeth indicates to friends that she didn't want to have a in-public political role, but through the home, through sociability, through entertaining, she was able to understand what was going on in the political context and undoubtedly sway the leaders of the American Revolutionary period and the early Republic.
What goes better with classical music? A blancmange, lemon meringue pie, or a croquant bouche? I guess all
Why
three.
not all three?
There you go.
Absolutely. We'll get back into describing some of our desserts here. Again, you just did it for me, the blancmange. Beautiful, pristine white, which was a rarity in the 18th century.
This was really the highlight of the 18th century sweet table.
Milk and good vanilla bean and a little bit of dark rum just creates a really magical thing.
I like the way you garnished it with fresh blueberries.
Thank you.
Spectacular. Now, I know that most of the sweet tables, and including the Sinful Feast, always had centerpieces. So I'd assume that a croquant bouche would have been most likely the centerpiece. It's just a puff stuffed with vanilla cream and mounded up.
That's right.
And glazed with sugar.
Pile of cream puffs, that's all it is.
I see one of my favorites because it has so much historical significance is the vol au vent. It's just something that everybody made, whether it's sweets, whether it's savory, anything goes. Diana and I will show you how to make the vol au vent. In our days, it's relatively simple. This is definitely one of the most spectacular desserts of the 18th century. Dates back many, many, many years. It was served in the royal courts of France. And it takes 3 steps, as you know.
Absolutely.
So let's get started.
Let's do it. Very simple. Just going to use 2 different size cutters here. So I'm just going to get a little flour on the large cutter, and you can cut all of your puff dough out into large circles first, and then you can go back and cut out the smaller holes. Also important to note that you want to work very quickly and with cold dough because it just becomes nearly impossible to handle otherwise. Now we're going to go back and cut 2/3 of these with the holes out. We have just egg wash here. It's just 1 beaten egg with a tablespoon or so of water. And just, you don't have to go all the way over, but easier to cover the whole thing. And then we'll gently place this one on top. And you want to make sure they are stacked as perfectly as possible so they don't lean over on you in the oven. Beautiful. We definitely want to chill them first so that the butter gets cold again and won't melt out all over the place. So these just came out of the freezer. As you can see, I can pick them up. They're nice and cold. That's perfect. Just get a little egg wash on the top of each one. That'll help them brown nicely and shine up. Okay, perfect. These are good to go into our 350, 375 degree oven for 15 to 20 minutes. Keep an eye. You'll see they'll get nice and tall and perfectly crisp and ready to fill.
All right. The Volleyball is baking away at a rapid pace.
Yes, indeed.
Now it's time for us to make the pastry cream.
We have here 2 cups of milk. Have to use whole milk. And to that, we're going to add 1/4 cup of sugar. And we'll just go ahead and give that a stir. And this needs to go over to the stove. And we will bring it just to a simmer. You don't want to boil it, just barely until you see those bubbles around the edge. And while that is happening, I will get the thickening agent ready. Okay, so now the thickening agent for the pastry cream, we have another 1/4 cup of sugar that we're going to whisk together with 5 tablespoons of cornstarch. So that, in addition to some egg, we need 1 egg and 1 yolk. Okay, these, break the yolks, and we want to whisk them until they're fully combined. It should be very pale and very thick.
Our milk is getting warm.
Wonderful. Here we are, we have our milk just barely simmered. So now we're going to liaison. I'm just gonna scoop out a little bit at a time while whisking the eggs and just slowly drizzle it in so that you don't curdle the yolk. That's what we're trying to avoid here. So just continuous stirring, adding a little bit of cream at a time. And once the egg mixture is warm to the touch, you can go ahead and toss it all back in the pot. Again, doing it slowly and continuously moving. That is a very key part. Otherwise you end up with curdled pastry cream, and that is no fun for anyone. So now we go back over to the stove. So we're just over medium heat here. You don't want to go too high. You don't want it to come to a boil too quickly. Just continuously moving it around, scraping the bottom and the sides of the pot. You do want it to come to a full boil. It won't look like a rolling boil like pasta water would. It's just going to puff up in places throughout the custard. That is exactly what you want. Okay, perfect. So I will hold this, if you will scrape this out into our big bowl here.
Look at that, how beautiful.
Perfect.
I like it when the blend works.
Just a couple tablespoons of butter here. Perfect. That will help it to cool.
Stay smooth. And a little bit of extract.
A little bit of vanilla extract. And you could flavor it with any liqueur or extract you want. Vanilla obviously being the most classic.
Chill it down really good.
That's right. We're actually going to press plastic wrap directly to the surface of the custard once the butter is all melted to prevent a skin from creating. Yes, exactly. We'll get some plastic on this and get it in the fridge.
Fantastic. All done.
Okay, chef, our pastry cream is sufficiently cool.
Perfect
timing.
timing.
2 hours or so. You can definitely make this a day in advance, no problem.
And now what we're going to do, you're going to push the thing down a little bit.
That's right.
And now comes really the fun part.
I'm going to go ahead and put our pastry cream into a piping bag here. Okay.
A little whipped cream.
But it gets a healthy dollop.
There's only one thing left to do.
Woo!
That's the idea.
Explosion.
That's good though.
Wonderful.
I can see why everybody was so crazy about Volleyball. Such a great flavor. A lot of work, but the payoff is exceptional. Look at the beauty.
Absolutely.
So let's wrap up this Sinful Feast, Diana. One of my favorite right in front of me here, which is the Linzer tart.
Right, so this is just basically a cookie dough with cinnamon and hazelnuts, and you spread the jam really thin and just do a beautiful lattice on top, and doesn't really need much presentation other than that. Also, fruit tart.
Tell me what kind of dough you used for the crust.
For this one, I chose a sweet paste, so it's just another cookie-like crust, very crunchy. The pâte brisée can sometimes get a little bit soft with the fruit tart, so I really wanted something to stand up.
And I know now you're going to serve me something that is very classical 18th century.
That is exactly right. Here we have some Shrewsbury cakes flavored with coriander and brandy. Just a little bit of Devonshire cream. And here we have some raspberry jam.
But you could use any jam.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't have to use raspberry. Wow. You know what, Diana? This Shrewsbury was so delicious that we got to show our viewers how it's done. So let's go back to the bake shop at the City Tavern to knock out some Shrewsbury cake. What do you think?
Great idea.
Fantastic. So Diana, Shrewsbury cake, it's really not a cake.
No, not really.
From all the research I've done on it, it was a very big staple in the 18th century. Reason for it, it lasts forever. So you kind of have it made, and if somebody steps by unannounced, little jam, little butter, some tea, and you're in business.
Well, let's get started, shall we? So it starts with 1 egg and 1 egg yolk into a separate bowl, as always. 1 egg yolk, so I'll just separate right in the shell here into the bowl. Perfect. Break these up a little bit, and these are room temperature eggs, and that will help as we add our melted butter here to not scramble them. And this is not hot, obviously I'm holding it in my hand, but it is very melted. We'll just get that in there.
Just regular whole butter, right?
Just regular whole unsalted butter. To this brandy, just gonna stream that in as I mix. And here we have some flour and half a cup of sugar and 2 teaspoons of coriander, the other flavor element, which just adds it's such an interesting combination, the brandy and the coriander. Add that to the flour, mix together before they hit the wet ingredients. And then flour goes in, and we'll just stir this together, and it'll start to come together in a ball.
Little or less is always better.
Oh, yes.
So if you make this recipe, don't go wild on finding other ingredients.
This is coming together nicely, and we're gonna dump it onto the table and knead it just a little bit. I have a little bowl of flour here. Dump it out. And you can knead it a couple times. You don't want to go nuts. It is soft. It won't take long to come together. So here we are, perfect Shrewsbury dough. I'm going to use a little extra flour here just to keep them from sticking. And roll away. You want them about 1/4 inch. So we're just about there. One more pass. Perfect. All right. Okay, so just press with our floured thing here. Perfect. And transfer to our sheet tray. And just keep going.
And how many you get out of it? About 15, 16?
Yeah, it depends on how thick you roll them,
Yeah.
but a dozen to a dozen and a half.
The ideal with this, but like they don't move much.
Right, no, they don't rise much in the oven. So now I'm just going to use a paring knife to cut a simple little design. You don't really have to go too deep. You just want to score it ever so slightly. So a little star pattern, heart, if you will.
I think it would have been important for the upper echelon to have them look very pretty because it's, again, served in the afternoon with an afternoon tea, jam, and butter or Devonshire cream. So
absolutely.
That's perfect.
And you want to bake them in a very low oven, 300 degrees for 30 minutes. Come back and check them because you're really just trying to dry them. You don't want to darken them any.
They're beautiful. It's a dense cookie with butter and jam on top of it, makes it moist again. They have a long shelf life.
Yes, if you keep them, stored in an airtight container, I hear they last indefinitely.
So they maybe been here already from the 18th century?
It could be. It could be.
Thank you, Diana. As always, a spectacular job. And I thank all my friends that came out today to partake in this extraordinary event, to bring you a taste of history. Huzzah! Huzzah!